Good evening, Ryan Willard here, Director of TTHS Architects and host of the Business of Architecture UK. And I'm enjoying these IGTV moments with you all. And this is quite an interesting one actually, because this blog post, I want to try and distill my thoughts about the return on investment of education. And I speak about education a lot. It comes up a lot, particularly in the architectural conversations that I have with architects who are running their businesses, the relationship between industry and academia. And I think it's a difficult, there isn't a simple, well, there are simple answers, but the major thing is a huge shift in mindset around the purpose of education. So I want to talk about the return on investment on education, and particularly with architectural education. It's a 7 years training to become an architect. It takes a long time. And if you look at the return on the investment in terms of how much money, particularly nowadays, you're spending £10,000 a year on tuition fees and the extra amount of money for living expenses, the amount of student debt that will be accumulated by the time you enter into the professional world, and then you use that as a comparator against the amount of the starting salaries and the kind of the typical or average career progression of an annual salary of an architect. Well, it's disappointing to say the least. But that's not the whole story. So using that as a metric is a beginning point, and it's the metric of finance. They're looking at it as a kind of cold, hard set of facts. And it is a reason why lots of people leave the architectural industry. It's a lot of reason why people from disadvantaged backgrounds do not get involved, or they get involved and they leave, because they're just financially is not the incentive. However, there are other forms of return on investment, and return on investment is a complex thing, and particularly with seasoned entrepreneurs I talk about, they will ask questions about, yes, there is understanding the financials of the return on the investment, but also you need to be able to look at the emotive, powerful things that you can get. So if you do architectural education, or you spend a long time in education, and it is your passion, and it is your sort of zone of genius, and it is an area where you just fall head over heels in love with, then that's a very, very good reason to be doing that thing. So in the world of architecture, you study architecture, and then you become an architect, and you love working in practice. Fantastic, you've hit the jackpot there. And then there are other skills for you to learn, because the skills that actually make you money are not included in your education. Now, this is not just to do with architectural education. This is all education. So when I criticize architectural education, it is really the context within which all education exists in Western society, with the exception of maybe Finland. Our education is an industrial format. It is geared towards putting everybody through a standardized system of testing in order to delineate and grade people in terms of ability in certain subjects. And those subjects have been crafted and they are tested in a certain particular way, which I would argue has little, or not always, much relationship to how good a person actually is at that subject, because they're being tested in a particular way. Now, that's a whole deeper subject, and I could talk about polymathematic thinking, visual literacy, how drawing can help you understand mathematics, how physical dance and movement can help you unlock physical principles and give you a very deep embodied understanding of scientific phenomena. That's another question, but it's kind of linked in here because it shows and begins to point at the limitations of our existing education system. So, I saw a very well-known entrepreneur recently state that the skill, and this is like, you hear people who have made a lot of money in their lives will often talk about how the skills that they use to make wealth or create wealth are not taught in school. Now, this is not talking about oh, I had to learn about economics and accounting and, you know, sort of basic business studies at school. That's not really the engine of wealth creation. And I use the word creation there because that begins to indicate the mindset shift towards income and education as well. So our traditional education is geared towards the grading system, having us all lined up and you go, okay, this person is better than this person in this particular area. Therefore, you can be selected for a job, employment, trading your time for money. Different from wealth creation, okay? There's a lot here, I know. I'm going to have to unpack this again more simply in the future. So going back to this entrepreneur, he was talking about the skills that make you money. Thinking, negotiating, selling, communication, marketing, learning to manage your time, which is ultimately always a factor of you being able to manage yourself, your own self-discipline and self-leadership. Investing, understanding the principles of how to make your money work for you and the accumulation of cash flowing assets as opposed to spending your money on liabilities and shit you can't afford, which is 99% of all human beings on the planet do not accumulate assets, they buy liabilities and find themselves into very difficult financial situations. And because we are trained so deeply and all through our education that the only way to make money is through exchanging your time for money, we have an issue there. Working in your passion. This is another skill that you do not necessarily explicitly learn or cultivate during school education. Architectural education, I would argue, you do get the opportunity to investigate and find and discover things that you are deeply passionate about. That is, for me, one of the most powerful aspects and returns on investment that you could ever get from architectural education. That is a massive one. Travel, the importance of travel, the importance of experiencing and learning from different cultures. Again, you will not learn this explicitly in school. It is one of the deepest, biggest learning tools, skills that can help you increase your income. Again, architectural education is brilliant for that. Communication, emotional intelligence, understanding your emotions, again, your ability to understand your decision-making processes and the things that make you do what you do is a skill that can be learned and can be taught, critical in business, critical in accumulating wealth. And again, if you're learning these, the reason I'm reading these skills out, because if you learn these skills can make your education, regardless what it is in, you can unpick further revenue from it, value, if you sense, in emotional value and in financial value. Leadership, understanding how income tax works, it's a big one. Financial statements, financial literacy, and how to handle failure. Again, so there's a lot of emotional leadership, intelligence qualities here. You do not learn these explicitly at school. Sometimes you might, sometimes they happen naturally, they occur just by having inspirational teachers around. But that is this list, this stuff, this is where the real return on your investment is. So going back to return on investment on education, right? You put this in there, you will get bigger returns from any education that you invested in. Architectural education as well, I think, has a hidden amount of value locked up in it. And it is, the reason why I say it's hidden is because you study architecture, you assume, or there is a very strong connection with becoming an architect. Sounds obvious, but I would actually say that being an architect in practice is so wildly different from what you will do in university that the two are almost different subjects in many, many aspects. So you don't need necessarily go to university to become an architect. You can learn it in practice. Bang. And also, learning architecture, studying a subject which is so broad, so touches on so many different areas, is amazing because there is so much value in the synthesis and the creativity and the way of thinking and looking at the world as an architect that it is incredibly valuable in different industries. And there is another way to increase the return on your investment in your architectural education. Look outside of architecture.